I had been putting off going to the dentist for months. My old dentist retired, and I didn't bother looking for a new one until I started getting these dull pains in my back teeth. You know, the kind of pain you can ignore until it suddenly isn't so ignorable anymore. So, I found a place nearby that had decent reviews online and figured I'd give it a shot. The office was in this rundown shopping center that had more empty stores than actual businesses. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find a dentist, but I was in a hurry and figured it didn't really matter where it was as long as they could fix my tooth. I walked in, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Too quiet. No buzzing of dental equipment, no chatting from the staff, not even a radio playing in the background. Just silence. There was one guy sitting in the waiting room, probably in his 60s, and he was twitching his leg nonstop. Made me more anxious just looking at him. The receptionist didn't even glance up when I approached the desk. She just slid a clipboard toward me, still tapping away on her computer, and told me to fill out the usual forms. After what felt like forever, she called my name. "Mr. Anderson?" she said, without looking up from her screen. I stood up, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. I kept telling myself it was just a dentist appointment, nothing to be worried about. I followed her down a narrow hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, giving the place a weird, uneasy vibe. When we reached the exam room, she gestured for me to go in. That's when I met Dr. Ward for the first time. He looked pretty average, tall, maybe in his late 40s, with small, round glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He smiled at me as I walked in, but something about it didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right, Mr. Anderson, take a seat and let's see what's going on," he said, gesturing to the exam chair. I sat down, and immediately the chair reclined backward, almost too quickly. The bright light above me flicked on, making it hard to keep my eyes open. I squinted at him, feeling a bit uneasy. "So," he said, putting on his gloves, "you've got some pain in your molars?" "Yeah," I mumbled, already regretting coming here. "It's been bothering me for a while. Probably a cavity." He didn't respond right away, just nodded and leaned in, his fingers cold through the latex gloves as he started poking around in my mouth. He wasn't rough or anything, but his movements were quick, almost mechanical. "Interesting," he muttered. "What's interesting?" I tried to ask, though it came out garbled since his hands were still in my mouth. He just smiled again, that same flat smile. "Nothing to worry about. Looks like a bit of decay, but we can handle that easily." He straightened up and pulled off his gloves. "I'm going to recommend a filling today. It's a simple procedure. Shouldn't take long at all." At this point, I was trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Sure, the place was a little weird, and the guy wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy, but dentists aren't supposed to be your best friend, right? They're just there to fix your teeth. "Okay," I said, trying to sound casual, but my hands were gripping the armrests a little tighter than I wanted to admit. The nurse, who I hadn't really noticed before, stepped in with a tray of instruments. She was quiet, too quiet, and the way she moved felt almost robotic. She didn't make eye contact, didn't smile, just handed Dr. Ward the tools and stepped back into the shadows of the room. Dr. Ward positioned the light over my face again, and I had to squint from the brightness. "You might feel a little pressure, but don't worry. It'll be over before you know it," he said in a tone that was somehow both calming and unsettling at the same time. I nodded, trying to relax, but something about the room felt wrong. It was too clean, too cold. The air smelled faintly of bleach, sharp and clinical, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound I could hear. The tension in my chest was building, but I kept telling myself it was just nerves. Just another dentist visit. Dr. Ward adjusted the drill, but before he started, he turned to the nurse and said something that made my stomach drop. "Dim the lights, please." Dim the lights? I've had plenty of fillings before, and never had a dentist ask for mood lighting. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I could feel sweat prickling at the back of my neck. This wasn't normal. The nurse flipped a switch, and the room plunged into a strange, soft gloom. The only thing bright now was the spotlight focused on my open mouth. I could feel my pulse in my ears as Dr. Ward leaned in closer with the drill in hand. "Just relax," he said softly, the drill whirring to life. But all I could do was panic. The sound of the drill sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't the usual high-pitched whine you expect at the dentist. This was slower, deeper, almost like something out of a nightmare. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that it was just a filling, nothing I hadn't been through before. But the dim lights and the eerie quiet in the room were making it impossible to calm down. Dr. Ward leaned in close, his face half hidden in the shadows. "Just stay still, Mr. Anderson. This will only take a moment." The way he said it, like it was an order more than reassurance, made my skin crawl. I could feel the pressure of the drill against my tooth, but there was no pain, no discomfort, just this strange sensation, as if the nerves in my mouth were dead. I should have felt relief, but instead, it only added to the unease. I glanced over at the nurse, hoping to see something, maybe a sign that this was all normal. But she just stood there, watching. Her hands were folded in front of her, and her eyes were locked on me, unblinking. I tried to focus on the ceiling, to think about anything other than the weird atmosphere of the room. Then Dr. Ward started humming. It was quiet at first, just a soft, low tune. But the longer he worked, the louder it got. It was some kind of old, repetitive melody, like something you'd hear in a lullaby. His humming echoed in my head, blending with the sound of the drill. The combination made me feel like I was sinking, like the room was getting smaller and darker by the second. "Almost there," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the noise. But something wasn't right. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, my palms sweating against the cold leather of the chair. I tried to move my arms just to shift a little, but they wouldn't budge. My fingers felt heavy, numb even. A rush of panic shot through me. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was clear. My body wasn't responding. "Hey," I mumbled, trying to speak clearly despite the mouthful of dental tools. "I can't move." Dr. Ward didn't respond at first. He just kept drilling, his eyes locked on my tooth, as if I hadn't said anything at all. My chest tightened, and I tried again, this time louder. "I can't move." He paused, the drill falling silent. For a second, I thought he'd finally address what was happening, but instead, he glanced down at me with that same eerie smile. "It's just the anesthetic," he said calmly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Don't worry, you won't feel a thing." "Anesthetic? You didn't give me any." My voice was rising now, panic breaking through. "Of course I did," he replied smoothly. "A stronger dose than usual, to help with your nerves." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I questioned myself. Had I missed something? Had he injected something without me realizing? No, that didn't make sense. I hadn't felt a needle, hadn't tasted the numbing agent that usually comes with dental work. But before I could argue, he turned away and continued his work, completely ignoring the rising fear in my voice. My heart was pounding, and I could feel sweat dripping down the back of my neck. The numbness was spreading now, creeping from my arms down into my legs. It wasn't the kind of numbness that comes with an injection. This was different, like my body was shutting down, piece by piece. I forced my head to turn, trying to get a better look at the nurse. Maybe she could help. Maybe she could see that something was wrong. But when our eyes met, her expression stayed the same, cold and detached, like she'd seen this 100 times before. "Help me," I tried to say, but the words came out weak, barely a whisper. She didn't even blink. Dr. Ward's humming started up again, louder this time, filling the room with its unsettling tune. The drill buzzed to life once more, and I could feel the vibrations deep in my jaw, but still no pain. Just that pressure and the overwhelming terror of being trapped in my own body. I wanted to scream, to jump out of the chair, to run, but all I could do was lie there, my limbs useless, my mind racing. Time stretched out, each second feeling like an eternity. I was completely at his mercy, and he knew it. "Just relax," he said again, almost absent-mindedly, as if my panic was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The drilling seemed to go on forever, the sound bouncing around in my skull. My breath was shallow, and my throat felt tight, like I was on the edge of a full-blown panic attack. And still, the nurse stood there, silent and unmoving, her eyes fixed on me like I was some sort of specimen. Finally, after what felt like hours, the drill stopped. Dr. Ward sat back in his chair, peeling off his gloves with a casual snap. "All done," he said, his voice cheerful now, like we'd just had a pleasant chat and not some nightmarish experience. "You did great." I tried to sit up, desperate to get out of that chair, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My muscles were like dead weight, and the fear in my chest was turning into pure, unfiltered terror. "I need to leave," I managed to choke out. My voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. Dr. Ward looked down at me, his expression unreadable. "Not yet, Mr. Anderson. You still have one more step to go." I couldn't move. My body felt like it was sinking into the chair, like I was being swallowed up by it. The sensation was terrifying. My arms, my legs, they were completely useless. It was as if I was glued down, stuck in this nightmare of a dentist office. My mind was screaming at me to get out of there, to run, but my body wasn't listening. It was frozen, paralyzed. Every nerve in me was screaming for help, but all I could do was stare at Dr. Ward, his calm face looming over me. "What did you do to me?" My voice came out broken, barely a whisper. I was fighting to stay calm, but my panic was rising fast. Dr. Ward glanced down at me, his face expressionless, almost bored. "Relax, Mr. Anderson. Everything's going just as planned." Planned? What the hell did that mean? I tried to move again, but my body was completely unresponsive. It wasn't the usual numbness from anesthesia. This was different. It was like my body had just shut down. "Something's wrong," I gasped, my breath quickening. My chest felt tight, and I could barely get the words out. "I can't move." You're perfectly fine," Dr. Ward interrupted, his voice smooth and steady, like he was explaining a simple procedure. "This is all part of the process. You'll regain feeling soon. Just give it time." But I wasn't fine. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, my heart pounding like it was about to burst out of my chest. I was sweating, beads of cold sweat dripping down my temples. I wanted to scream, to demand that he let me out of that chair, but my mouth felt heavy, my tongue thick and uncooperative. I looked to the nurse for help, hoping she'd see how terrified I was. But when I met her eyes, I saw nothing. No concern, no emotion at all. She just stood there, watching me like I was some kind of experiment, her hands still neatly folded in front of her. It was like she wasn't even human, just another tool in Dr. Ward's arsenal. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling. "Let me go. I need to leave." Dr. Ward leaned in closer, his face hovering just above mine, his eyes narrowing. His smile was gone now, replaced with something colder, more calculated. "You're not going anywhere, Mr. Anderson. We're not done yet." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not done yet? What was he talking about? I could feel the panic clawing at my throat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I wasn't just scared, I was terrified. This wasn't a routine dental appointment anymore. This was something else entirely, something dark, and I was trapped in the middle of it. Dr. Ward turned away, his back to me as he sorted through his tools. The sound of metal instruments clinking together filled the room, and each clink sent a new wave of dread crashing over me. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, my pulse racing as the reality of the situation settled in. I tried to move again, desperate to get out of that chair, but my body was like a sack of bricks, completely useless. My fingers twitched weakly, but that was it. I couldn't even lift my arms. My legs were dead weight, pinned to the chair. I was utterly and completely helpless. "Don't struggle," Dr. Ward said, not even bothering to look at me. "It'll only make things worse." Make things worse? What could possibly be worse than this? My mind was racing, searching for some kind of explanation, some way to make sense of what was happening. But there was nothing. No logical reason for why I was paralyzed, for why I couldn't get out of this chair. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to choke out, my throat tight with fear. Dr. Ward finally turned back to me, holding something sharp in his hand. It gleamed in the dim light, reflecting the cold, sterile glow of the overhead lamp. "You don't need to worry about that," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Just let me finish." Finish what? I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My heart was slamming against my ribs, and I felt like I was about to pass out from the sheer terror of it all. I strained against the chair, trying to fight the numbness that was keeping me pinned down, but it was no use. My body wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to Dr. Ward now, and whatever sick plan he had in mind. The nurse moved closer, still silent, her face emotionless as ever. She handed him another tool, something long and thin, and I could see the glint of metal as it passed between them. They were moving with such precision, like they'd done this 100 times before. "Please," I whimpered, my voice barely audible. "Please stop." Dr. Ward ignored me, his focus entirely on whatever twisted procedure he was about to perform. I could hear the steady hum of a machine starting up again, louder this time, and the vibrations ran through my teeth, rattling my skull. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the air thick with the scent of disinfectant, and something else, something metallic like blood. The lights above me seemed to flicker, or maybe it was just my vision blurring as my mind started to shut down under the weight of the fear. "Stay still," Dr. Ward said in that same unervingly calm voice. "This won't take long." But I knew he was lying. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be over soon. I was trapped, and I had no idea if I'd ever make it out of that room alive. The buzzing sound grew louder, vibrating through my jaw, through my bones, until it felt like the whole room was shaking. My mind was screaming, but my body couldn't respond. I was a prisoner in my own skin, at the mercy of a man who clearly had no intention of letting me go. All I could do was lie there, helpless, as Dr. Ward loomed over me, his tools gleaming in the dim light. And in that moment, I realized something horrifying. I wasn't just another patient to him. I was his next experiment. The buzzing of the machine drilled through my head, a constant, unbearable hum. My body felt like dead weight, still numb and useless. Every part of me wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but I couldn't even twitch. I was a prisoner in that chair, with Dr. Ward hovering over me like some twisted surgeon, and the nurse watching, silent and detached, as if none of this was even remotely unusual. Dr. Ward worked methodically, his gloved hands moving quickly, but I couldn't see what he was doing. The bright overhead light was angled just enough to keep me in the dark, but I could hear the clinks and taps of instruments being swapped back and forth between him and the nurse. It was almost like they were performing a routine procedure, except nothing about this felt routine. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't stay there, helpless, while they did whatever they were doing. My heart was pounding, fear coursing through my veins like a fire that was getting hotter by the second. I had to get out of there. I forced myself to focus, to breathe, even though my breaths came in short, panicked gasps. I had to try again. I had to make my body listen to me, even if it felt like it wasn't mine anymore. My fingers were still numb, my legs still heavy, but I could feel something, just a flicker of sensation in my toes, a slight tremor in my fingertips. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me hope. I concentrated on that feeling, willing it to spread. My muscles twitched, but it was like trying to move through quicksand. Every small movement was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. I wasn't going to let myself die in this chair. I glanced up at Dr. Ward, his face focused, the machine still whirring next to him. He didn't seem to notice the tiny movements I was making. Maybe he thought the drugs, whatever the hell he had given me, were still in full effect. His arrogance was my only advantage. The nurse turned away for a moment, reaching for something on the counter behind her. It was now or never. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I shifted my arm, just a little, just enough to feel the leather of the armrest beneath my fingers. It was slick with sweat, and I could barely grip it, but it was something. I curled my fingers, feeling the weight return to my hand. My heart leaped in my chest. I could move. "Stay still, Mr. Anderson," Dr. Ward said without looking up from his work. He must have noticed the slight movement, but he didn't seem concerned. He thought he was still in control. I wasn't about to wait for him to realize I was slowly regaining control of my body. With a surge of adrenaline, I yanked my arm upward, my fingers slipping free from the armrest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to catch him off guard. Dr. Ward's head snapped up, his calm demeanor finally cracking for the first time. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. All I could focus on was getting out of that chair, out of that room, out of his reach. I could feel the pins and needles of sensation returning to my legs, the dead weight lifting ever so slightly. He stepped closer, and his shadow fell over me like a dark cloud. "I told you not to move," he growled, his eyes narrowing. But I wasn't going to stop. My arm flailed weakly, and I could barely lift my head, but the feeling in my body was coming back faster now. The numbness was retreating, and with it came the realization that I might actually have a chance to escape. "Restrain him," Dr. Ward barked, and the nurse immediately moved forward. Her hands were outstretched, ready to force me back into the chair, but I wasn't about to let her. With all the strength I could muster, I shoved my arm outward, knocking over the tray of instruments beside me. Metal tools clattered to the floor, the sound loud and sharp in the small room. Dr. Ward stepped back, his calm exterior finally breaking. "Enough," he shouted, his voice losing its clinical detachment. But I didn't care. I was moving now, my body sluggish but functional. My legs felt like jelly, but I swung them off the chair, my feet hitting the cold tile floor. The nurse grabbed at my arm, but I yanked it free, stumbling forward, nearly falling to the ground. "Get back here," Dr. Ward ordered, his voice full of rage now, but I was already halfway to the door. My legs wobbled beneath me, and I could barely keep my balance, but I didn't stop. The room spun around me as I lunged for the door, my hands slipping on the handle. The nurse was right behind me, her breath hot on my neck, but I twisted the knob and threw the door open. I fell into the hallway, my body collapsing against the wall. The bright fluorescent lights outside the exam room were disorienting, and my vision swam. But I was free. I was out of that horrible chair. I heard footsteps behind me, quick and heavy, and my heart skipped a beat. Dr. Ward wasn't going to let me leave. I pushed myself up, my legs still shaky, and forced myself to move. I staggered down the hallway, my body protesting every step, but I wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. The hallway seemed endless, each door blurring past me as I ran. My breath was ragged, my lungs burning, but I couldn't stop. I could hear Dr. Ward's voice behind me, shouting something, but I didn't listen. All I could focus on was getting out, finding the front door, escaping this nightmare. Finally, the reception area came into view. I could see the front door, just a few feet away. My vision was tunneling, my legs ready to give out, but I pushed forward. Just as I reached the door, my hand gripped the cool metal handle, and I yanked it open, stumbling into the bright daylight outside. The rush of fresh air hit me like a wave, and I gasped, my body collapsing onto the pavement. I was free, but the terror still lingered, wrapping around me like a shadow. Dr. Ward was still inside, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over yet. I lay on the pavement outside the dentist's office, gasping for air like I had just come up from drowning. The sun was blinding, making everything feel surreal, like I had somehow escaped into another world. My limbs were weak, trembling from the adrenaline and fear, but the cool air was a relief, a reminder that I was still alive, still in control, at least for the moment. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My mind was still spinning, replaying the nightmare I had just escaped. But as the seconds ticked by, reality started to creep back in. I was out. I had made it. The quiet of the parking lot was in sharp contrast to the horror I had just left behind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, still being pursued. I forced myself to sit up, my legs wobbly as I scrambled to my feet. I looked back at the building, expecting to see Dr. Ward charging out after me, maybe with the nurse at his side, ready to drag me back inside. But there was no movement. No one came running. The door remained closed, the windows reflecting the bright sky. For a moment, I felt like I had escaped for real. Maybe he wasn't going to come after me. Maybe I was just another patient, one who got a little freaked out. But as much as I wanted to believe that, deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I wasn't just another patient. I had felt it in the way he looked at me, in the way the nurse stayed silent, her eyes empty. Something was wrong in that place, and I wasn't the first person to notice. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and took a shaky step toward my car, my body aching from the tension. I needed to get away, to put as much distance between me and that office as possible. My car was parked just a few rows away, and as I reached for my keys, the sudden thought hit me. I hadn't paid. I stopped dead in my tracks. I hadn't even seen the receptionist on my way out. I bolted through the hallway without thinking, but no one had tried to stop me. No one had called after me. And yet, as I stood there in the parking lot, something nagged at me, something I couldn't quite place. Had Dr. Ward let me go? The thought made my stomach turn. I shook my head, trying to clear it. That didn't make sense. Why would he let me leave after everything he'd done? After the numbness, the restraints, the cold, calculated way he had treated me? There had been nothing normal about that appointment. I fumbled with my keys, my hands still shaking, and unlocked my car. Sliding into the driver's seat, I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. The familiar, enclosed space of my car should have made me feel safe, but instead, it felt suffocating. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my racing heart. That's when I noticed it, a tiny bruise on the inside of my forearm. Small, barely noticeable, but definitely there. I hadn't seen it before. I hadn't felt anything during the procedure, but now that I was looking at it, my skin tingled, the faintest ache spreading through the area. Had he injected me with something? Panic surged through me again, and I pulled my sleeve up, inspecting my arm more closely. The bruise was perfectly round, like the mark left by a needle. My mind raced. He had said something about a stronger anesthetic, about needing to calm me down, but I couldn't remember him ever giving me an injection. I hadn't even felt a pinch. My breathing grew shallow as I stared at the bruise. What had he done to me? Was that why I couldn't move during the procedure? Was that why I had felt paralyzed, trapped in my own body? The thought was terrifying, and I could feel the edges of panic creeping back in, threatening to overwhelm me. I needed to get out of here. I needed to go home and figure this out. Maybe see another doctor, someone who could tell me what the hell was in my system. But as I reached for the ignition, something else caught my eye. On the passenger seat, lying neatly on top of my jacket, was a small, folded piece of paper. I hadn't left anything in my car. I knew that for sure. My stomach dropped as I picked it up, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. The paper was smooth, untouched, as if someone had just placed it there minutes ago. The note was handwritten in small, neat print, and as I read the words, my blood turned to ice. Asterisk, you'll be back soon, Mr. Anderson. They always come back. Asterisk. The words swam in front of my eyes, and I dropped the note as if it had burned me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I glanced around the parking lot, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. There was no one there, no one watching, but somehow, I knew they were. Dr. Ward had let me go. He had wanted me to leave. I slammed the car into gear, my hands trembling as I peeled out of the parking lot, the tires screeching on the asphalt. My mind raced as I sped away from that building, away from the dentist office that I now knew was much more than it appeared. What did he mean? They always come back. The words echoed in my head, filling me with dread. Did he think I would return willingly? Or was there something else, something waiting for me, something that would force me back? I didn't know. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going back there. Not ever. Whatever Dr. Ward had done to me, whatever he had planned, I wasn't going to be his next experiment. But as the miles stretched between me and that office, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That no matter how far I drove, no matter how hard I tried to forget, Dr. Ward would find me again. The drive home felt like a blur. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, so hard my knuckles turned white, but I could barely focus on the road. Every shadow, every car behind me felt like it was following, like he was following. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Dr. Ward's face, those cold, calculating eyes staring back at me. But the road was empty, just endless stretches of pavement, and my mind spinning out of control. I didn't stop until I pulled into my driveway. The familiar sight of my house should have comforted me, but it didn't. My chest was still tight, and my body trembled with leftover adrenaline. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, trying to gather myself. The note was still on the passenger seat, crumpled now from where I had dropped it in panic. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. Asterisk, they always come back. Asterisk, the words replayed in my head, sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. What had Dr. Ward meant by that? Was it just a sick mind game? Or had he done something to me that I didn't know about yet? I forced myself out of the car, locking it behind me as if that simple act would keep the terror at bay. My house felt strangely quiet as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Normally, home was where I felt safe, but now every creak, every whisper of the wind outside put me on edge. I double-locked the door and pulled the blinds shut, not wanting to give anyone, a chance to see in. I walked to the bathroom, turning on the harsh lights over the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, pale and sweaty. My clothes were rumpled, my hair sticking to my forehead, and the small bruise on my arm stood out like a dark reminder of everything that had happened. I touched it gently, wincing as a dull ache pulsed through the spot. The bruise was more pronounced now, a perfect circle, and I knew without a doubt that something had been injected into me. I didn't know what, but it was there. I could feel it under my skin, like a poison, something spreading slowly. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I jumped, my nerves still on high alert. I fumbled to pull it out, half expecting some unknown number to flash across the screen. Maybe Dr. Ward himself, calling to remind me that this nightmare wasn't over. But it wasn't a call. It was a text. Asterisk, did you make it out okay? Asterisk. For a moment, I didn't understand. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but it looked vaguely familiar. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Then it clicked, the older guy from the waiting room. The one who had been twitching his leg. I hadn't spoken to him, but I had noticed him. How did he have my number? I hesitated before responding. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure if I wanted to engage in whatever this was. But something inside me needed to know. Asterisk, who is this? Asterisk, I typed back, my heart racing. The response came almost immediately, like he had been waiting for me. Asterisk, I was at the office today. You need to check your arm. He does this to everyone. Asterisk, my stomach lurched. I'd already checked my arm. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't need a stranger telling me what I already feared. My hands trembled as I typed back. Asterisk, what do you mean? What did he do to me? Asterisk, there was a long pause this time. The minutes stretched out, and I felt like screaming, the tension building with every second of silence. Finally, the message came. Asterisk, it's not what he did. It's what he put inside you. Asterisk, I dropped the phone. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Inside me. My mind flashed back to the bruise, the numbness, the feeling of helplessness as I lay in that chair. I stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the bathroom sink to keep myself upright. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. What did he put inside me? Was it a drug? A tracker? My mind raced through a million possibilities, each one worse than the last. My phone buzzed again, and this time I could barely bring myself to look at the message. Asterisk, you need to get it out. It's the only way. Asterisk, get it out? I stared at my reflection, my eyes wide with fear. I touched the bruise again, my skin cold and clammy. There was something under the surface, something small but hard, like a lump. My heart pounded in my chest, panic taking over. I couldn't do this. I couldn't go back to that office, but I couldn't stay like this either. Whatever was inside me, it didn't belong. My mind reeled, trying to come up with a plan, but I was spiraling too fast. I had no idea who to trust, and the thought of going to a regular doctor terrified me. What if this was beyond what they could handle? What if they couldn't even see it? I ran to the kitchen, yanking open the drawer with all the junk, scissors, tape, tweezers. I grabbed the tweezers and rushed back to the bathroom, my pulse roaring in my ears. My hand shook as I pressed the tips against my skin, right where the bruise was. The thought of digging into my own flesh was nauseating, but the thought of whatever was inside me staying there was worse. I pinched the skin, trying to feel for the hard lump again, and when I did, I squeezed. The pain shot through my arm, sharp and blinding, but I didn't stop. I pressed harder, feeling the skin break, blood welling up. I gasped in pain, but I kept going, desperate to get it out. The tweezers slipped, and I tried again, my vision blurring with tears. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it, something metallic, barely visible under the blood. I gritted my teeth, yanking the object free. It was small, too small for what I'd expected. A tiny metallic chip, no bigger than a grain of rice, covered in my blood. I stared at it in disbelief, my mind unable to process what I was holding. I dropped it onto the bathroom counter and stumbled back, feeling lightheaded. I had no idea what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. Dr. Ward had put it inside me, and it wasn't good. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with one final message. Asterisk, now run. You don't have much time. Asterisk. I looked back at the tiny chip on the counter, feeling the walls close and around me. I didn't know who this person was or how they knew what was happening to me, but one thing was clear. I wasn't safe. Not here. Not anywhere. And Dr. Ward? He wasn't done with me yet.